going to get my step count in today, walking up the steps back and forth. Just a reminder, the Q&A for all the sessions, this session and the following sessions, go to slido.com, and the meeting code number is 7786. So dial now. We have a number of speakers who are going to be providing you with important leading edge information. In this particular case, my colleague Jim Milne from the American Chemical Society is going to be talking about a major anti-piracy initiative that he and some other publishers are working on. And bottom line is, Jim and I would like to know whether some of you would like to join with him and his publishing colleagues in a coalition to work on this problem. Jim, you need this. It's really important.
Thanks, John. And hopefully you can hear me here. Thanks for the introduction, and I'd also like to just personally thank John Sack and HighWire for inviting me here today to give a presentation on behalf of the Coalition for Responsible Sharing. As John mentioned, I work for the American Chemical Society, so I'm based in the Oxford office here in the UK, and I'm speaking here as a representative and the chair of the Coalition for Responsible Sharing. Just to give you a sort of snapshot of what I'll talk through is why there is a coalition, what we're seeking to achieve, what our goals are, the approaches and the activities that we've undertaken to date, followed by I'll go through some of the achievements and how ResearchGate has responded, and our own ongoing activities and drive and negotiations with ResearchGate to tell you where we still need to get to. And the final point will be an invitation for interested parties to join the coalition. I ought to say that 3 of the publishers here at the HighWire meeting are already part of the coalition, but we're welcoming more members by the week almost. So first thing to say is that we're focusing here purely on ResearchGate. We're not addressing any other content sharing platforms. So the way I describe it is that, like Sci-Hub, everyone knows that they're serious pirates. They're basically using stolen credentials. They've got a pretty dodgy background and the way they're funded. I see them as the Blackbeard pirates of the scientific world. ResearchGate, as you probably know, has venture capital funding, about 100 million euros of funding already. They are seen by many in the academic community as an acceptable form of sharing, but actually they are still, in a form, they are still pirates. They're the Johnny Depp pirates that people seem to like, but they are still very dangerous for us as a publishing industry. So first of all, I'll say who the coalition is. You'll see 14 logos there. We tend to be announcing new members about every 3 or 4 weeks, depending on the timetable that works for them. Even within these 14 publishers, we represent 1/3 of all published content in the scientific literature. So a significant corpus of material there. On top of that, we represent about 50% of all citations that come in. So the quality of the articles that we're representing certainly is foremost there. So why are we taking action? This slide kind of represents a snapshot of what the issue is. ResearchGate has over 7 million full-text articles available that should not be there through copyright or license conditions. We're not talking about open access articles with CC BY. They can be shared as broadly, as widely as you want on commercial platforms and so on. These are articles that should not be shared publicly in this way unless they're done through the voluntary principles of STM sharing. On average, there's about 150,000 additional articles being uploaded by ResearchGate each month. And ResearchGate were altering articles. They were going into the metadata, they were putting a cover sheet on it, they were changing the reference links at the back of the article, which is basically one of the fundamental principles of scientific publishing is the integrity of the article that we want to make sure that it's kept. So since 2015, the International Association of STM Publishers entered negotiations with ResearchGate to try and bring them into the fold of a number of scholarly collaboration networks which abide by copyright principles, work with publishers in a harmonious way so that they can sustain themselves and work well with the publishing industry. But that came to nothing, and last year, middle of last year, STM basically, as a group of publishers, said that this is going nowhere, we're not going to reach a solution. So from the STM perspective, that was the end of those negotiations. And at that point, the coalition was formed to pick up the mantle and say, right, this is the principles that we abide by, and I'll explain a little bit about that in the future. So just to say a few more words about ResearchGate and why this is so important to us as publishers, but also as an industry. As you're probably aware, ResearchGate is a for-profit business, and it is seeking to disrupt our industry. They're exploiting massive copyright infringements. We talk about millions of articles here, and it's basically jeopardizing the sustainability of publishing. They're doing nothing to bring in the content, peer review the content. They're not funding any of the creation, but they're seeking to exploit the work that is done by publishers with no collaboration with us in terms of the working in harmony. So their unlawful conduct effectively could disrupt the scientific communication process, and really we've been in negotiation with ResearchGate to find a solution. The Coalition for Responsible Sharing, I'm the chair of this, I've said in media interviews that the goal there is not to be an organisation in 5 years' time. In fact, if we're there in 5 years or even 3 years' time, that probably signals that we've failed. We're there to negotiate a settlement, to find a way that ResearchGate can work and collaborate in a way that allows sharing of articles aligned to the voluntary principles. Now, sharing is a deeply rooted culture within science, and it's something that we as publishers all endorse and fully support. We all have policies, and many of them have been developed over the last few years as well to enhance sharing. And really what we're talking about is the manner of the sharing that we endorse and we support, which allows the ecosystem to flourish. So fundamentally, we want to ensure that scientists and researchers can share their research quickly, easily, and responsibly. Now, another point here is that ResearchGate tells the world that it respects the intellectual property rights of others, but in discussion we've hit a brick wall basically, where they also say that it's not their responsibility to monitor or police copyright infringements. And here I use an anecdote that about a year and a half, maybe it was 2.5 years ago, I can't remember. I was on the Thames with the New Year's Eve celebrations. And in the run-up to the celebrations, great activity, lots of music pumping out, lots of people happy, looking at the London Eye. And I took some video of some friends who were partying, and I went to upload it on Facebook. Now, Facebook immediately pulled up a screen and said, we can tell that in the background there's some music, and it appears to be under copyright. Have you got the permission of the copyright holder before you upload this? So, and I honestly cannot remember whether I chose yes or no on that one. I suspect I was probably too good and said no, because who reads our Facebook posts anyway? But the principle here is that ResearchGate, just like Facebook, just like all the other service providers like that who have moved from the dark ages of the 1990s, they all put up their filters up front. ResearchGate has refused up front to provide that, do that filtering. And this is something that the coalition has actually provided the technology solution for ResearchGate to install. So within 1 or 2 months, they could have a filtering process. They've outright refused to do that. And the reason for that is they want to build up their content, they want to keep that momentum going, and then they will address the illegality of what they're doing down the line. So, you know, this is the people we're dealing with. So, what do we want to achieve? As a group, we have a common goals that we all sign up to. Firstly, that no new illicit uploads should take place. That's the filtering that I talked about. The technology solution exists. So an article being uploaded by a researcher, we want to make sure that researchers have a coherent, sensible path through the whole process. As the article is uploaded, they can be told, okay, this is a CC BY article, it can go wherever you want. Or it has no license, it can go up where you want. So theses might be an example there. Whereas if it's a copyrighted article, an article that we publish and we invest in, then they're told that it has to go to a private sharing environment. So sharing on ResearchGate is fine if it's in a private sharing environment. We also want to address the existing full text articles that have been uploaded that shouldn't be there, so removing them, and we're taking action on that. We want ResearchGate to stop altering articles. They have actually gone, I'd say, 2/3 of the way there. They've stopped, basically on our activities, they've stopped uploading, changing the metadata and stopped changing the references. But they're still putting a cover sheet there. And I remember reading in a Wiley report from about 2 years ago that people actually think ResearchGate is the publisher of these articles, and they sometimes think they're actually a society publisher as well, because they get confused about it. So basically, they're representing themselves as the publisher of these articles. So we see the cover sheet as one of the areas that we should still move on. But the fundamental achievement is we want to reach agreement with ResearchGate. We are negotiating with them, we've had meetings with them, but we're still at an impasse, and we're wanting to keep that momentum up. So our approach. First of all, I mentioned this user-friendly technical solution. This is one of the benefits of being in a consortium or a coalition as we are. We're pooling our resources, and we've been able to provide this solution. The same solution we're using to identify articles within ResearchGate that shouldn't be there. So we have as a coalition for our members, we're able to identify articles as they're uploaded that we want them to take down after the fact. As it says here, to get ResearchGate back to the negotiating table, we are negotiating with them, but we're kind of at this impasse, and we're trying to create that extra pressure to basically say, let's find that harmonious solution. And to do that, we're sending takedown notices on a fortnightly basis to ResearchGate, identifying articles and abstracts that they should not be hosting, and they're taking them down. There's still some flaws in this because they're taking them down but putting them into a sort of semi-private area. So people can still request them, but they're no longer getting one-click access, which was one of the issues. But now they have to wait until the author allows the sharing beyond that. So we're still working on that with them. And two members, so that's the American Chemical Society, who I'm from, and Elsevier, are taking a court case that you're probably aware of to ResearchGate through the German courts to clarify copyright responsibilities. So the takedown notice is one activity, but it's not a permanent solution, because otherwise we'd be here forever. But we want the courts to address the fundamental principles behind ResearchGate's behaviour. Now, the first hearing was held in Munich on April 18th, and that was fairly favourable. It was a preliminary meeting. They confirmed that articles and abstracts are copyrighted, and they confirmed a number of things that we were asking. The next court hearing is in October, and we'll see where that goes. But this process does take time, so we're about halfway through, I'd say, an 18-month process there. We're also seeking to educate others, whether it's publishers, but also researchers, as part of this. So we're having a common approach to educating scientists and researchers about how they can share articles, what they can do, what they can't do, and if they want to share them widely on ResearchGate, for instance, then how to buy an open access license, CC BY, so that it can be put on a commercial site, such as ResearchGate. So this timeline just kind of depicts that since 2015, there was many unsuccessful attempts of reaching agreement with ResearchGate. Around about October last year, we formed a coalition, and since then we've been announcing new members. The original coalition was of five publishers and information providers and societies. We recognize also that many organizations have every organization has an approval process. Some of them are fast and some of them are slower. So the timeline to announce our full membership is open-ended. Since about November, we've been sending takedown notices, and that's involved over 100,000 authors. It's something like, just to give an answer, it's something like 10,000 articles at the moment, but I'll say why it's such a small number compared to the 7 million articles we talked about earlier. We've also filed legal action to press the point and get the principle addressed. And there's also a communications team within the coalition to handle our press statements, working on public relations, and I'll say a little bit about that in a second. So what have we achieved? Within the coalition members, we identified 1.7 to 2 million articles that were infringing copyright at the start. Very quickly, ResearchGate moved 1.4 million of these from one-click public access to this request full text, so there's a more convoluted process. They did this for the coalition members. They took away about 92% of our articles from that one-click access, whereas for the people who were not part of the coalition, they also removed some articles, but it was more like 20%. So 80% of non-coalition members' articles are still one-click access, freely available to anyone. Now, it was very interesting here, and during negotiations, during our meetings with ResearchGate, they've actually alluded to the fact that they kind of wish they hadn't done that, because it showed that they could identify the copyrighted articles. They removed 1.4 million copyrighted articles, with only one or two, and I really mean one or two exceptions. They did not remove open access CC BY articles. So they knew which articles were copyright infringing. So this is actually showing that they know which articles shouldn't be there. And then the question for us as the content providers, the ones investing in the creation of the content, why are they entertaining the uploads of those in the first place? They've also reduced the level of article alteration. I mentioned that earlier. In terms of public relations, now this is a really interesting point. In the run-up to the coalition being announced, in the run-up to activities being taken, takedown notices, and the filing of the legal suit, just like we're a society, not-for-profit organisation, most of our members are in that domain, but there are commercial publishers too. There was a significant concern about reputational damage, about taking on ResearchGate, which, as I said, was seen as a sort of Johnny Depp pirate rather than the Blackbeard pirate. Now, since the announcements we've been making, we've been monitoring and tracking media tone, media messaging, and we were hoping for a fairly balanced, almost 50% positive, 50% could be negative. You can see in the dark blue here that largely the responses have been positive. And actually I received a message from a director from the Max Planck Institute when we were announcing that one of his articles was we were sending a takedown notice, because we tell our authors in advance so that they understand why we're doing it and what their options are. And it was an incredibly positive supporting message saying you've got to take on ResearchGate. They're the bane of scientific publishing, and wishing me all the best in this. And we've seen this in Twitter and such like, so here's a few examples. The sentiment on Twitter has been, we thought would be a firestorm of negativity about, here's these greedy publishers doing all these things. It's actually been the opposite. It's been people saying ResearchGate are a pain. It's not all been positive, so don't let me big it up too much. But you can see lots of fairly positive messages, including from open access advocates, who have been saying this is not open access, this is not a sustainable model that would be suitable in the future. They want to focus attention on actual open access rather than the parasitic approach of taking articles and saying they're free or open access in that way. So we haven't reached a solution. That's why I'm here presenting to you. Their illicit access continues, largely through request full text for coalition members, so there's still ways for people to gain access. It's not difficult for ResearchGate to move into the sort of the legal side, like so many other scholarly collaboration networks do. And that would take them filtering articles, which is their fundamental principle they say they want to. But if they could filter articles on upload and also share usage data and join the voluntary principles, the STM voluntary principles, which is not a big step to take, but it's a step they're currently unwilling to take. This is why we have the legal cases, this is why we're putting pressure on them, and this is why we're sending more takedown notices. We're also continuing because their approach is unsustainable. It's disruptive for the research community. So if you think as a researcher, you're uploading an article and then a week or 2 weeks later, it's no longer there because it's been taken down. That's not a smooth process for the researchers. What we should be doing is working in a way that makes good sense there. The long-term solution that we offered has been rejected, as I mentioned, and the agreement that they've made with Springer Nature is not actually a long-term solution either. It's basically a takedown in perpetuity solution. And I can say a few more words about it, but the principle there is, and we've not got clarity on what Springer Nature has, even though we've asked for details and so forth from a number of, from CUP, from TIMA, and from Springer themselves. Nothing has formally been signed because I've asked questions about what's the data mining entitlement that they've allowed ResearchGate to do, because they're uploading the articles and then saying there will be a slick method to take them down within 24 hours, within the week, whatever. During that time, other entities, such as Sci-Hub, can control that article, take it, because it's available in the public domain. During that time, anyone, including ResearchGate, can data mine that article. Again, I haven't heard any clarity about what that means, but it also means that in perpetuity, each individual publisher has to monitor ResearchGate, send takedown notices, and keep monitoring ResearchGate going forward. It also means any other entity will expect that similar approach, which is building up a significant challenge. The solution that we see, which is smoother for researchers and smoother for everyone, is to filter up front. So last couple of slides. I'm here to represent the Coalition for Responsible Sharing. We do invite other publishers to join and be part of our activities. That adds strength to our messaging, it adds strength and weight to what we can do, but also it allows us to help protect your content, your copyrighted material. Through the Coalition, we have some fairly significant members which are funding this to a large extent. We contribute based on the number of articles we publish. So with Elsevier, with Wiley, with ACS there are some fairly sizable publishers that are contributing there. We have some smaller publishers that are paying a smaller amount, but for that you have a common communications team, you have a very slick takedown notice approach method using legal counsel in Germany. We also have, there's one other thing I've just slipped my mind, sorry. I'll come back to it. So it's a low cost and low risk way of doing it. Also, it's a collective way of doing it. Nobody's standing out on their own, so we're moving forward as a group. So the next steps, well, I'm here for any Q&A and happy to take questions now or during the coffee break or lunch break. I do also have a sort of handout with a status update, so if anyone would like a copy to take away back to your own organisation, it's a couple of months old, so we only had 12 members then and it's built up since then. But it provides a lot of the information I've covered here that you can use. I'd encourage you, if you're not already a member of the Coalition, to discuss the principles around this with your organisation. Is copyright important to you? And if so, the answer should be yes. If so, do you want to take a step forward? So this is a very slick way of doing it as part of a group. When we do announce new members, there's a process that we go through. You get legal protection. We sign a document that gives you legal protection. We announce only when the organisation is ready to announce. Everything is done only on sign-off by those organisations, of course. And we have an executive steering group meeting that meets on a regular basis to review what the legal teams have been working on, what the communication teams have been working on. And that is there for briefing, but also decision making. And everyone who's a member of the Coalition forms part of that. So the benefit here is to protect your brand. You know, copyright is important. The activities of generating content, publishing content, and the cycle of communication there is important. There's communication support. That was the other thing. By joining the Coalition, you also get access to the technology solution I alluded to that is able to crawl ResearchGate. And it does this whenever, well, it doesn't do it on a daily basis because the corpus of information is so big, but we do it on a periodic basis. They can identify your articles, and with some tuning, because it gets fine-tuned, it can identify which articles are entitled to be there and which articles should be taken down. And there's actually a middle ground, the ones they're not 100% sure on, so they put those in the middle and then the individual publishers can check. But largely, I'd say 99% of articles are in the extreme side, and it's very accurate. And then there's legal analysis and support too. So the sales pitch ends here in the sense of, here I am saying protect your journal content, and this is an invitation for you to join. I did slip through in the last slide. The rough cost is about €1,000 for per 1,000 articles published. So that's the scale. We do have a minimum, I think it's €2,500 a year, but that's an annual fee, and that covers everything that we're doing in that regard. So that just gives you a ballpark figure. And the more coalition members, the fee reduces, of course, because we do it pro rata. So with that, I've got 54 seconds, so I'm pretty pleased with that. And I'm happy to take some questions. I'm not sure if we've got more time to do that. If not, then we've got coffee breaks and beyond. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Jim. So if you raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you so you can ask questions. Jim, there was a couple questions that came in electronically. One is, what's the estimated cost to publishers of the impact of ResearchGate? Estimated cost to publishers of the impact of ResearchGate.
All right, yeah, this is a question that... Oh, thanks. Yeah, this is a question that's been posed to me by journalists, that they basically say, well, nothing's wrong. Have you lost any money because of ResearchGate? Surely you could just work in harmony, there's been no harm. And the answer to that is, we know anecdotally, and it's a little bit more than anecdotally now, that our sales team are getting pressure from libraries, mainly consortia, when they say, if you don't give us X price or X offset deal or whatever, we have alternatives to go to. And we know that when for instance, the RSC's non-renewal with the Dutch, they had a A4 sheet that they handed out to their faculty showing where they could get content from the RSC because they don't have a subscription anymore. And on that was ResearchGate. On it was also Sci-Hub, but Sci-Hub had a legal warning saying this is not legal. Sci-Hub, ResearchGate was one of the options given there. There was also a Nature article a few months back talking about the Elsevier in Germany negotiation. And there was a quote from the negotiating team from Germany where they said, we can get this content elsewhere. So the financial impact, is it a number that we're just seeing people saying, we're cancelling because there's ResearchGate? Anecdotally, the answer is we're under a lot of pressure. We're probably seeing price points coming down because of it. So there is a value, there is a cost, for sure.
Let's see, the third one down.
Even when hosting OA content, RG is very reluctant to link out publisher losing. Yes, we have succeeded there to an extent, because initially they were editing the links on the references. So if you clicked on a reference, rather than going through the DOI, through Crossref to the publisher site, they edited them all back to ResearchGate. So you never leave the ResearchGate environment. And that is one of their terms and conditions even, that you're not, as an uploader, you're not allowed to put links beyond ResearchGate, or they frown upon it. So we've actually achieved that's changed. But they still have a principle that says, once you're in ResearchGate, you should not leave ResearchGate. We say, you should go wherever you need to, in that sense.
Okay.
And the question about Academia EDU, we did look at that, but in terms of the scale of Academia EDU, it's a fraction, a small fraction of what ResearchGate is. Now, that's not to say that eventually we may not want to move in that direction, but we're having a singular focus now because it's important that we address ResearchGate and we do it properly, and we're not distracted left and right at this point.
Last question, Anthony?
Researchers seem to be moving between, in my experience anyhow, working on early career researchers, between download to a request full text. They think request full text is perfectly okay, I think. I haven't questioned them on this, but I think so.
Yeah, and this is what we're taking, our legal teams are looking at this as well. This is what I call semi or pseudo private. So the idea is that if you want to have an article for free, you can request full text. ResearchGate then goes to all the authors of that paper and says, do you want to provide this person with the full text? Click yes, and at the same time, would you like to re-upload your paper? Now, to us, that's unacceptable because it's not really private. It's not part of the voluntary principles, which defines what a private sharing network is. It's basically saying anyone in the world can have an article through this sharing mechanism. So it is something that we are addressing, but we haven't addressed yet. Sorry, we haven't solved yet.
All right. Oh, go ahead, one more, and then we will switch to the next session.
Hi, I'm Donald Macaulay from the Canadian Medical Association Journal. As an editor, I agree with you absolutely. I think what you're doing is tremendous, but let me give you the alternative view, because I'm also an author and a researcher. And the problem is that as an author and a researcher, ResearchGate is fantastic. It is absolutely wonderful. They do a superb job. They reach out to me every day. I had a look just on the email, just out of curiosity as you were chatting. 3 emails from them today telling me, firstly, I'm a fantastic author. I've hit top hits this week. So many people have cited my articles. So, it really makes me feel good. So I'm kind of stuck between my editor hat and my researcher hat. And I kind of sense, the genie has escaped. It's going to be really, really hard to stop ResearchGate. And if you stop ResearchGate, somebody else is going to do it because the researchers are going to want it.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything you've said there. We're actually, just to be clear, we're not out to stop ResearchGate. We're actually out to bring them into copyright compliance. They can have a fully functioning business model and work if they could comply with the way that publishers expect it to work, so the ecosystem keeps going. But you're absolutely right. It is a slick system. They massage people's egos very well. Looking 5 years ahead, if I was to speculate, and it may not even be 5 years, I would imagine there will be other solutions where you can gain content in a very slick way. I know there's a number of organizations trying to do this right now. The question is one a VHS, one a Betamax, and what else is there? And is there a solution that will take over from ResearchGate or be better that is copyright compliant, which might then move ResearchGate in that direction? At the moment, they're out to make money. They're a commercial entity. We've picked up, because they've been going out trying to get more money from other venture capitalists, we've picked up what they're at, what their goals are. They say it's through advertising, but we also see there's networking value in the networking dynamics that they're building up. So, back to your point, yes, it works. People like Sci-Hub as well, even though they know that it's a terrible site in terms of it's in the dark web, their credentials may get stolen, but it's a very easy system to go use, and it is the one-click system. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure if I've answered, if you had a question, but I agree with what you're saying. What I'd like to see is that the publishers as a whole are endorsing the systems that are copyright compliant so they can pick up and advance beyond ResearchGate, so it goes backwards. Or ResearchGate becomes compliant. So, okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Jim. The next talk is Richard Sands of the BMJ, who's going to talk about registered reports. This is a relatively new concept. Those of you who haven't heard of it before will get a little bit of an introduction. Several HighWire hosted publishers are doing registered reports, BMJ and the Society for Neuroscience in the States. Richard, there's a clicker up there. Got it. Thanks.
Right. How's that for sound? Is that okay? Good. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you, John, for inviting me all the way from the 3rd floor to discuss registered reports this morning. My name is Richard Sands. I'm on the publishing staff at BMJ, specifically BMJ Open Science. And I should say that I don't necessarily stand here as an expert on registered reports. This is a bit more of a report from someone involved with a team that's currently rolling these out, and talk about some of the things that we've been doing, some of the things other publishers are doing, and finish up with some of the questions that we've been grappling with and don't necessarily have answers to yet. So what registered reports are part of the broader open research movement. So they're connected to open data policies, to open methods repositories, to experiments in open peer review. All of these things form part of a network. Registered reports are part of that network. So in brief, what they are is a two-stage way of authoring, conducting, and publishing hypothesis-driven research studies, so only particular types of research. They were introduced as a concept around 5 years ago by the journal Cortex. They've been most enthusiastically adopted by psychology journals, but the idea is spreading throughout science. And the most high-profile proponents of these at the moment, and people whose work I'll cite quite a bit as I go through, are the Centre for Open Science, based in the US, and Professor Chris Chambers, who's at, I think, Cardiff University in the UK. Those are two very good Twitter accounts to follow if you want to find out more as these develop. So, in essence, a registered report is split into these two stages. At stage one, researchers design a study and they submit it to a journal for peer review. So at this point, what they're submitting is still just the study design, they haven't done anything. This looks like a journal article, this is no results, no discussion. It's just detailed methods, a detailed analysis plan. That's then sent by the journal for peer review if they like it, and as with a regular article, rejected, revisions are asked for, or if at the end of the peer review process the editor likes what they've seen, that stage one is given what's called an in-principle acceptance, or an IPA. And what that means is that the journal commits to publishing the results paper, which will come at the end of the study, and that's what's known as the stage two. There are caveats to that. The researchers must have performed the study that they said they were going to do. They have to have performed it pretty much exactly as they said they were going to do, and analysed it in the way that they said they were going to do. And the stage two part of it is still peer reviewed for all of that aspect, and to make sure that the conclusions are justified by the results and so on. But basically what the journal's saying with that IPA is, provided you do what you say you're going to do, we'll publish your results regardless of what those results end up being. The acceptance criteria for these can still be journal specific, so the idea is that the methods are of the highest quality possible, but journals are still free to filter editorially. They can say, no, this isn't interesting enough for us, this is out of scope, it's not novel, we just publish something like this. All the usual reasons why selected journals might reject articles. And a really, really key feature is that researchers may not start the study until they've been given this in-principle acceptance, if they want their article to maintain this status as a registered report. If they start it before they've been given this in-principle acceptance, then it loses that status. So that all seems pretty simple. There's a diagram there that shows how that works, but I think there are a lot of workflow people in the room, so you will know that that obviously is very much a high-level summary. This is what the Centre for Open Science has as its suggested workflow, which is still, I think, relatively straightforward, pretty intelligible to anyone involved with peer review. That is version 6 of our workflow at the moment. We've probably overcomplicated slight aspects of this, and a lot of this is to do with whether or not you publish that stage 1, which we'll come to. But it is worth noting that things are maybe a little bit more complicated than just that. So these stage 1s, the study plans, they aren't necessarily published, though as the name suggests they must be, or should be, registered somewhere. And in general there's a requirement that these are registered in a recognised repository. What counts as a recognised repository seems to be up to journals to decide. That stage 1 is integrated into the final results paper, the stage 2, and some journals require that The stage 2 incorporate verbatim what was submitted as the stage 1, so no text changes to the introduction or the methods at all. Registering the stage 1 information can take, in practice, different forms. It can be posting of what's effectively an abstract on a repository somewhere, so basically just a statement of intent, we're going to do this study, this is broadly speaking what we're going to do. Or researchers might publish the full protocol somewhere, they might publish it in a journal, they might put that in a repository. And if for any reason the study ends up not happening, journals, repositories will publish withdrawal notices to say this was going to happen, it's now not happening for X reasons. So, in summary, that's what they are. They're a two-step process for peer reviewing methods and accepting the results paper, so long as the methods were registered somewhere prior to the study beginning and they were subsequently stuck to. So what problems might these registered reports solve, and what advantages might they offer? So many argue there's a reproducibility crisis in science. There are people who say there isn't. There are some people who say, well, it depends what you mean by reproducibility. But in general, a lot of people saying there is a reproducibility crisis in science. These are a lot of the problems that they highlight. And this has been especially high profile in psychology, where registered reports have gained most traction. Put briefly, this is the idea that too much published science is not reproducible for various reasons, and this lack of reproducibility therefore means that too much published science is either wrong or at least can't be trusted. Peer review of the study plan before the study takes place is designed to help improve reproducibility by putting editorial and peer review emphasis on methods rather than on results. Having been accepted in principle by a journal, researchers then don't have to worry about producing the most eye-catching results in order to get published, because they've already been accepted. Instead, they can focus on producing the most rigorous, robust study designs, carrying out the studies properly, because that's what they're going to be judged on rather than results. This helps protect against publication bias, where only exciting or supposedly positive results are reported by researchers or accepted by journals. There's also the related problem of selective reporting and outcome switching, where researchers tailor the relative priority they've assigned to their results after they've found out which they think are the most impressive. So that's protected against by ensuring that researchers have to report all of the pre-registered outcomes and their analyses, and that they give them the priority that they originally assigned to them. So researchers can still, in their stage 2, report exploratory results, unplanned analyses, serendipitous findings, but they have to be clearly labelled as such. So that's hopefully what's in these for science. What's in this for authors? Why might they get involved? Well, hopefully just the incentive of a more robust study plan after it's been through a peer review process. They might get a quicker route to publication after the study's written up, because they've got that pre-acceptance. It might be eventually considered a marker of esteem. A registered report might be considered, just in general in the community, to be a higher quality paper than a research paper. They might get a badge if the journal they're publishing in uses these Centre for Open Science badges. But it's worth keeping in mind that just because the study was pre-registered and the analysis was pre-stated, that stage 2 is still going to be peer-reviewed. So editors and peer reviewers will still have to agree with the researchers' conclusions. They've still got to get over that hurdle. There's also a question mark as to whether these are actually flexible enough to accommodate all types of science, and I think that's something which we'll find out over the coming years. There are people objecting and saying, these only work for a very small defined set of scientific experiments. In terms of why journals might be interested, hopefully they would think that anything that results in better science would be a good thing, better research, better journal. You're offering a carrot of in-principle acceptance, so that might be a way of getting better studies submitted to you earlier on. The Centre for Open Science, who are one of the main proponents of these at the moment, say that there are no known risks to publishing registered reports, which I might add a caveat to in a moment. They also say that if impact factors are your thing, the usual caveats apply. They've been better cited so far than the impact factors of the journals that they've been published in. But it does seem to me, it seemed to us when we were sort of working these out, that at the very least they probably increase reviewer workload if there's a stage 1 to be reviewed, and then you ideally would have the same reviewers looking at stage 2. And you will need a good bank of reviewers able to assess the methods. And anyone who's worked in an editorial office knows that getting good statistical reviewers, good methods reviewers is pretty difficult. If you have to use new reviewers for the stage 2 than you used for the stage 1, and they spot things that the reviewers at stage 1 didn't spot, how are you going to work through those issues? There's a do-it-yourself kit on that link at the Centre for Open Science if you're running a journal that's interested in starting these. And they're also supporting a sort of grassroots campaign called Registered Reports Now, which is designed to help researchers lobby their preferred journals to start using registered reports. So if you haven't encountered these yet, you may well do soon. In terms of things that journals are doing with these, some journals like PLOS ONE have worked with funders to integrate funding review and journal peer review. There's the reproducibility project around cancer biology, which has involved eLife using these to gather evidence about factors influencing reproducibility more generally. And if I can abuse having the microphone for a moment, I should say BMJ Open Science is waiving open access charges for PhD students who submit registered reports as a way to try and get these embedded earlier on in scientific practice. So if you follow the right Twitter accounts or the right blogs, you'll see a lot of discussion about these at the moment. There's a lot of talk about them. In terms of the actual scale of implementation, there's kind of two ways you can look at this. You can say either not a lot of people are doing these at the moment, or we don't really know how many people are doing these at the moment. The Centre for Open Science lists 108 journals that are open for this type of submission, and they list 125 published reports. So that's obviously a drop in the ocean in terms of the overall scientific output. There's a really good preprint which I recommend looking at called The Universe of Registered Reports by Tom Hardwick and John Ioannidis from Stanford. It was published earlier this year. They looked at the current state of play and they highlight a few issues that sort of chimed with some of the things that we were talking about at BMJ, and that will probably need to be worked out by the community as these take hold. And that includes issues of transparency. First thing they pointed out was protocol availability, so the visibility of those stage 1s that are initially submitted to the journals, because remember, they don't necessarily get published by the journal. And what Hardwick and Ioannidis found was that quite often these stage 1s weren't available. And so there's no real visibility of, if you like, the bottom part of the iceberg. We know what the top is, the ones that have been published, those 120 or so, but we don't know how many are currently in process necessarily. They identified an issue of self-identification. Not all of the published registered reports actually say that they are registered reports. And there are 1 or 2 articles out there that they found that said they were registered reports, but actually weren't. There's a diversity of registration processes. Some are on repositories, some have been published in journals, some have been uploaded as supplementary files, some are in repositories but not as full deposited protocols and so on. And they found some duplicate protocols, so stage 1 information for the same study in more than one place, where the information wasn't consistent. So to supplement those, I'll finish with a few questions that we've come up with whilst we've been working out our way through these. There's no one way to do registered reports. That might be a problem, it might not be. The Centre for Open Science has a big spreadsheet that you can look at on their site, and it lists all the different factors that the different journals publishing registered reports currently have, and there are 21 different features, and very few journals, if any, feature all of those 21 different aspects. Are we best off thinking of these as article types, or are we best off thinking of this as a publication process? Does that matter? I don't know, maybe not. It struck me that if we were to think of this as a process, maybe we need more standardization than if we think about them as an article type. But then I thought you could say the same about peer review, and we've been working with different types of peer review for a long time, so that might be overthinking it. The biggest issue is probably editorial scrutiny, which is key to the success of pretty much any journal. Assessing that stage 2 against the stage 1 is going to be a really prominent part of that editorial assessment and that second stage of peer review. And from a medical publisher's perspective, the history of clinical trial registration probably tells us some lessons and gives us cause to be a bit cautious. Clinical trial registration for the non-medical publishers was a policy announced by a small group of journal editors, but is now endorsed by pretty much every medical journal, and states that people running clinical trials should register their studies in a repository before they recruit the first participants to those trials. So it's a pretty similar idea, and it's designed to address pretty similar problems. Came on stream about 13 years ago, and we know that it's still poorly understood, it's still not achieving what it's set out to do, and one of the issues we have to hold our hands up and say is poor oversight by editors, peer reviewers and publishers. So I think there's a clear implication for registered reports there, that it's going to be up to journals, and by journals I mean editors, publishers and reviewers, to decide how much deviation is allowed from that stage 1 to that stage 2, and how rigorously we're going to police the registration and the reporting. Seems to me there's also potential for registered reports to delay researchers. If they can't get on with their study until they've had that stage 1 peer reviewed and given that in principle acceptance, what kind of a delay might that introduce? How acceptable would that be, especially for researchers on a tight schedule? So does this mean that registered reports will mainly be used by researchers with what we know is the very rare luxury of time? Or will researchers accept that a delay at the front end is worth it if the publication end of the process might be quicker, given that they don't have to submit to a sequence of journals to get published? And maybe a more philosophical question, what does this mean for the role of editors in the future, and possibly by extension peer reviewers? Does it change the nature of editorial work, because editors at the moment are perhaps more gatekeepers of what gets into the literature? Registered reports perhaps makes them a bit more authorizers really of what work actually gets done, and is that a meaningful difference? None of these questions I think are insuperable, unsolvable. I think the consequences will come out in the wash over the next few years. And I think it's fair to say that at BMJ Open Science we're excited to be experimenting with these. We've started to receive submissions of this type. It's early days, it's a new article type and it's a new journal. But we see them as definitely being one thing that we can do to help improve reproducibility, rigour, trustworthiness of research. There'll be lessons to learn, but this is the shameless plug bit now when I finish. We're hopeful registered reports will play a part in the journal's mission to promote and engender trust in research. Plug over.
We have time for a couple of questions. There are some that have come in on Slido. We get that up. So if you take a look at your monitor, you can see the questions. Richard? And
So,
microphones will go around anyone who raises their hands.
So the answer to the top question is sometimes, and that's one of the things that hasn't been worked out. So some stage 1s are put into repositories under embargo. I think the Open Science framework, which is part of the Centre for Open Science, allows these to be embargoed, I think, for about 4 years, I think, from memory. One of the reasons why our workflow was so complicated is because we wanted to give people the option to publish that stage 1 as a protocol in the journal, but we've also got to accommodate people who might not want to do that. So at the moment this seems to be up to the journals, and then also up to the authors as to what they want to do. Question 2, should registered reports be registered with a Crossref and get a DOI? I guess that depends on which I mean, the resulting stage 2 that's published would have all the paraphernalia of a regular research article. It would just be, it might not even feature in a journal under a banner heading of registered report. So I would say yes, but I don't know if that's the question. Could an author take a results paper to a different journal than the one that accepted the registered report protocol? Well, that's also something that we've been thinking about, and my understanding of that would be yes, but if you register your report with a lower ranking journal, for want of a better term, and then you discover that your results are really stellar and you think, actually I can get this into wherever, BMJ. I guess you could do that, but you would lose the registered report status, because as I understand it, the journal with the ability to call that resulting article a registered report is the journal that awarded the in-principle acceptance. But I don't know if this has happened. It seems likely to me that it will happen at some point. And of course, if as part of being a registered report, the study would have been pre-registered, so all of that pre-registration information should be in the results paper, wherever that results paper ends up. But I would be astonished if this didn't happen or hasn't already happened, to be honest.
All right. Questions in the room? Can we get a microphone down here at the front?
Sorry, just the thing you just said about pre-registration. If someone, I might have got this wrong, if someone's pre-registered their trial at a trial registry, and then the peer review of the registered report recommends major changes to the protocol, what then happens to the pre-registration of the registry?
Okay, so my understanding of this is that the registration gets finalised when the in-principle acceptance is given. So that's when the final registration happens.
Thanks very much, Richard. A couple of announcements. You have an email, if you've registered for the conference, you have an email from Ophir that has the PowerPoints as an attachment. The PowerPoints for day 1, it's about a 15 meg download in a zip file, so you might want to go ahead and download that if you'd like to have the PowerPoints ahead of time. The break is on the ground floor, so if you head to the stairs, go down the stairs or take the lift down. There is a sign at the bottom of the stairs that will get you to the break room. We're getting power cords during the break to most of the tables, probably the ones on the periphery, so you should have power by then. And toilets, one of the toilets is up here. You follow the sign back to the left of the stage. There's also one on the floor below, approximately the same area. We'll see you back here at 5 after. We'll let you know a few minutes before in the break room that it's time to head on up. See you at the break.